Have you ever heard of a pyramid complex in Bosnia, said to be the largest of its kind in the world? That's at least according to Semir Osmanagic, a businessman and self-taught archaeologist who supposedly made this astonishing discovery in the mid-2000s. Semir has been a tireless advocate for the pyramids, even as other experts have dismissed the claims due to a lack of evidence. So why is this man so adamant about his theories despite virtually no support in academia? To understand this deceptively complicated story, we must first start with some history of Bosnia and Herzegovina and the war that tore the nation apart in the 1990s. The earliest echoes of a Bosnian state go back to the 10th century, peaking with the coronation of Stephen Tvrtko as the first Bosnian monarch. The Kingdom of Bosnia was eventually absorbed into the Ottoman Empire following its conquest in the mid-1400s, with regions being taken piecemeal over a 100-year span. By 1878, Bosnia was claimed by the Austro-Hungarian Empire but had yet to be formally annexed. Influence from the nearby Serbian kingdom stoked nationalistic feelings that the empire found difficult to control, and by 1908 there was a stronger push to better incorporate Bosnia de jure. Of course, Bosnian statehood being taken away had profound effects on conceptions of identity in the region, and this stayed with the people throughout the Ottoman and Austro-Hungarian occupations. Following World War I, Bosnia was one of the constituent provinces of the new kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, better known as Yugoslavia. A program of industrialization followed in the post-World War II era, with Bosnia especially benefiting as a less developed nation compared to its neighbors. This gave Bosnian centers like Visoko the chance to develop their economies more fully into the 1960s, among them a most lucrative leather industry. Despite these advances, however, there was still a strong nationalist sentiment brewing across the individual Yugoslavic republics, which came to a head in the late 1980s. Unrest in Yugoslavia continued over the next few years, and war was all but certain by 1992. The political elite riding this national fervor stoked sometimes old, sometimes previously non-existent sentiments amongst their respective ethnic groups, which inevitably boiled over. Bosniak Muslims bore the brunt of anger from Serbs who didn't want Yugoslavia to break up, and quickly became the targets of a brutal ethnic cleansing campaign. As conflicts intensified, swaths of desperate people fled the battered nation, leading to a worldwide diaspora. Emigration to the United States was especially popular, with Houston becoming a hotspot for refugees like Mr. Semir Osmanagic, or Sam as he would come to be known. Sam was working in the trade industry up until his departure from Bosnia in 1992. A student of economics initially, Sam soon put his talents to work at a Houston oil company. Though he quickly rose through the ranks, it seems there was a falling out when his suggestion to upgrade the computer systems went ignored. Sam cobbled together $500,000 from investors to build his own metalworks company, where he hired only the best and brightest. As the company became successful, Sam found more time to pour into his hobbies, namely ancient civilizations. He had a particular interest in pyramids, making frequent trips to South America to visit some of the impressive historic sites that dot the continent. By 1999, Sam was already compiling the first of many logs detailing his theories. Sometimes these included tangentially related topics like Nazi bases in the Antarctic and the Denver airport murals. Eventually, though, the mystery of pyramids worldwide became his primary focus. In 2003, Sam published a compilation of his notes titled Alternative History: Traces of Atlantis. Atlantis would feature in many of Sam's more spurious theories, like the idea that it was part of a worldwide energy network. His writings reflected a belief in the otherworldly nature of Mayan civilization, claiming they sprouted from the lost city of Atlantis and the Pleiadian star cluster before that. He even suggested that mankind might ascend to a higher plane of existence when the Mayan calendar reached the year 2012, which of course didn't happen. In autumn 2004, Sam returned to Bosnia to study the phenomenon of giant stone balls discovered throughout the country with a small team composed of 3 other men. These balls were an established, if not uncommon, occurrence worldwide, with Sam and associates having previously seen some in Latin America and the Middle East. Sam speculated these balls were somehow in tune with Earth's radiating energies. He also suggested markings found on some of them represented the various constellations. Sam found himself fully enthralled with Mayan histories, writing extensively about the society's construction of pyramids and what these represented. This seems to have fed into what would become his most audacious claim to date, which he came up with on one of his many trips home to Bosnia. Sam was touring around Europe in 2005 to promote his latest book when he was asked to join an expedition researching the fortress ruins near Visoko. Observing the distinctly triangular hillside, Sam reached a startling conclusion. These natural formations hid massive pyramids built by an ancient Bosnian society. This Pyramid of the Sun, as he called it, was said to be of comparable size to its counterparts in Mexico and Egypt. To establish his credibility, Sam organized teams of researchers to obtain soil samples. He began writing a new book on the topic where he fleshed out his pyramid theory in greater detail. Quote, "A wide excavation on one side of the pyramid showed the stepped character of the pyramid. Terrace of 2.5 meters, slope of 30 meters, terrace of 2.5 meters, etc. This is similar to the design of the Pyramid of the Sun in Teotihuacan, Mexico." Sam stressed that the pyramid's sides corresponded to the directions of a compass and aligned with the constellations, touting this as evidence of an intelligent man-made design. The story made early appearances in the Western media by way of reports from the BBC, and later CBS and the Washington Post. Such articles were often vague, though not entirely incredulous of the claims. The results of Sam's soil samples didn't convince professional geologists, with one expert calling them mundane. Nevertheless, Sam continued pushing his Bosnian pyramid claims, even setting up a non-profit called the Bosnian Pyramid of the Sun Foundation to seek government funding for more research. Sam believed the previously discovered stone balls were evidence of a sophisticated ancient civilization, and that they were contemporaneous with the Bosnian pyramids. Of note, the balls seemed to be discovered in groups of 3, and almost always forming a triangle. Yet despite his insistence on a connection to the pyramids, Sam remained uncertain of the balls' purpose. By June 2006, Sam was actively soliciting help online to excavate the sites. This team was tasked with carving out a tunnel Sam believed formed an underground network with an opening at the Pyramid of the Sun. He concluded that the density of stone blocks found at the sites meant they could not be naturally formed, placing them at up to 12,000 years old. Though Sam insisted he had world-class experts backing his claims, he was met with increasing opposition from established archaeologists and historians alike. Some of his so-called experts had previously made their own bogus claims, like the discredited notion that the Egyptian pyramids were cast in limestone, as opposed to being carved. A researcher named Anthony Harding wrote a letter on behalf of the European Association of Archaeologists after visiting the site himself, dismissing the idea as, quote, "wacky theories." He went on to recommend that the Bosnian government dispel these claims and redirect funds towards legitimate archaeological research. But Sam didn't back down, continuing his initial digs while lobbying the Bosnian government for more funding in the interest of reconnecting the nation to a lost glorious history. By now, Sam was convinced there were even more pyramids in the vicinity, giving them names such as the Pyramid of Love and the Pyramid of the Dragon. Sam was successful in obtaining more money. He developed a 5-year plan to continue digging, even asking the government to consider what infrastructure would be needed for supporting a predicted high volume of tourists interested in the venture. Sam had theorized the various pyramids were connected by underground tunnels rife with carvings and other evidence of past civilizations. Yet upon inspection, experts from around the world concluded that these were made in the excavation process to better convince the public of their validity. Sam's opponents pointed to these incidents as proof that the survey team was damaging the area, and even destructive to real archaeological pursuits nearby. The divide between Sam's team and outside opinions was becoming increasingly clear, and now the Bosnian government would have to decide if the project was worth continuing. Further complications for Sam came when it was revealed that many of the experts he was parading around as supporters had never been to the site. One was a British MP who didn't exist. But this couldn't dissuade supporters in Bosnia, who latched onto the claims as though they were indisputable fact. This made sense. After all, it provided a much-needed glorious cultural past and optimism of what the nation could achieve, barely a decade after one of its most bloody periods in modern history. Although there was some pushback from minor government officials, the public made it clear they wouldn't tolerate attempts to quash the theory. Politicians all the way up to the Prime Minister took note, throwing their support behind Sam. Meanwhile, skeptics were routinely disregarded or even called anti-Bosnian. The more prolific skeptics were often harassed in public. For the traumatized Bosnian people, the idea of ancient pyramids became so ingrained in the national psyche that there was no stopping Sam's growing influence. Nevertheless, experts from universities worldwide continued to scoff at Sam, reaffirming there was nothing special about the hills. They appeared to be a type of sloping formation called flatirons, which are especially prolific in southwest Texas where Sam had previously settled. It was around this time that the European Association of Archaeologists confronted the Bosnian government over its support, labeling it as a, quote, cruel hoax on an unsuspecting public. Other experts dismissed Sam's team as, quote, pyramidiates. Critics insisted that the cause was ultimately dangerous to Bosnia. It ate up a considerable number of resources, hurt the nation's credibility, and was damaging to real archaeological sites nearby. But true believers were steadfast that the discovery was evidence of Bosniaks being descended from ancient nobility. One specialist in Balkan studies from Harvard wasn't surprised. Quote, I think the pyramids are symptomatic of a traumatized society that is still trying to recover from a truly horrendous experience. You have a lot of people desperate for self-affirmation and in need of money. Through 2007, Sam continued planning the development of his excavation site, again focusing on the tourism it could attract. Around this time, Sam lobbied to have the area declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site. He was unsuccessful. Yet in the midst of Sam's attempts at shoring up better credibility, he continued to dabble in pseudoscientific claims about the pyramid's powers. Upselling the supernatural qualities of the area, Sam boasted that groups of tourists visited simply because they believed the pyramids had therapeutic properties. His claims grew bolder as time went on, with Sam asserting that a crystal skull he discovered in South America had a reaction to the pyramids emanating energies. He developed further explanations involving the idea of torsion fields and energy amplification systems that could send messages to the stars. Sometimes he was more coy about these far-fetched ideas, denying he had said anything unscientific despite video evidence to the contrary. Discover magazine noted Sam's protean nature when it came to talking about his findings. He could be the businessman to politicians, the scientist to the media, and the charismatic to his growing audience. By 2008, Sam was offering tours of the site as a means of promoting what he called, quote, the most significant monument of cultural and historical heritage in Bosnia and Herzegovina. He was lavished with international attention and media interest from all over the globe. In a 5-year span, the area had already seen over 400,000 visitors, injecting a substantial amount into the local economy. Almost overnight, an entire tourism industry sprouted up selling pyramid-themed trinkets and more. Reflecting on the government's confidence in the project, the Bosnian Pyramid of the Sun Foundation appeared to receive as much as 5% of the nation's federal budget. As this was going on, Sam tried solidifying his credibility as an academic by obtaining a doctorate in sociology, awarded to him by the University of Sarajevo in 2009. This paved the way for Sam to continue pushing his ideas in lectures offered throughout Eastern Europe and abroad. Sam managed to join both the Society of Archaeologists of Alexandria and the Russian Academy of Natural Sciences, the latter of which has been roundly condemned for its promotion of pseudoscientific ideas. Meanwhile, his critics maintained he was just using his excavation teams to carve the hills into his idea of an ancient pyramid. Some lamented that these efforts would be better off used to protect sites of legitimate archaeological interest throughout Bosnia. Despite the best efforts of archaeologists worldwide, Sam continued to be recognized abroad. A U.S. representative from Texas named Sheila Lee Jackson gave him a commendation for his tireless efforts on behalf of Bosnian immigrants in the state, complete with a gala dinner honoring him. Whether she was aware of his absurd theories remains unclear. Throughout this time, Sam continued giving lectures at whatever Eastern European universities would accommodate him, and expanded his presence with multiple websites that hosted his writings. Always eager to court publicity, he was approached by a Serbian tennis player named Novak Djokovic, who had sought his expertise as he began diving into spiritual philosophies with a New Age bent. Novak's support ushered in an influx of rekindled interest in the area, especially as he backed Sam's claims of its healing properties from the position of being a respected athlete. Consequently, it became a site of pilgrimage through 2020 as hopeful guests sought out its mystical protection in a time of uncertainty. While Sam has certainly courted this attention, he has been careful to affirm that there are no guarantees. Sports publications have meanwhile criticized Novak for his promotion of dangerously irresponsible pseudoscience, while at the same time reviving expert criticism of Sam. The story of the Bosnian pyramid theories is, in short, bizarre. As archaeologists worldwide have pointed out, there is simply no evidence that these hills contain anything more than a coincidental shape, a far cry from the intelligent man-made design Sam continues to push. Against all odds, Sam has become successful in convincing his supporters that this is a conspiracy from academia that unfairly excludes Bosnia from an ancient legacy of greatness. While some observers believe this is ultimately a benign phenomenon, there is merit in the fears that it could wind up damaging real archaeological pursuits in Visoko. After all, the area isn't far off from a medieval fortress and many sites of interest to Roman scholars. But even with this, both the locals and the government have compelling motivations for supporting Sam due to the implications legitimizing the Bosnian national narrative and a sort of exceptionalism. Plus, of course, the economic ramifications. Overall, the Bosnian pyramid theories demonstrate what national trauma can do to a population's psyche. The willingness to eat up any idea, strange or otherwise, that can provide some semblance of hope in spite of reality.
Why is a guy who investigates Bosnian pyramids at a UFO conference?
Because I've been invited. And when I saw the list, we have Brian Forrester talking about ancient civilizations in Peru, Brad Olson, the same thing South America. I said that first day makes sense for me. The rest of it is a little bit different, because since I'm a scientist, I want everything to be, confirmed scientifically.